Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our presentation on this very unique EB5 opportunity. My name is Rupy Cheema, and I'm the managing partner of EB5 Energy. I'm going to give you a little background on me first, then I will introduce our very special guest, Mitch Wexler. A little about me, I started in EB5 about 12 years ago. I started on the due diligence side. I co-founded a firm called EB5 Diligence, and where we were writing reports on EB5 offerings to assist investors to understand all the risks that they should understand the immigration risk, understand the financial risk, and really know the terms that they should be aware of. So we were typically retained by investors, agents, or immigration lawyers. I did that for a long time, and in that time, I had the opportunity to look at a lot of offerings. So, I've looked at probably hundreds of PPMs. So I was very familiar with most of the offerings that are out there in the last 10 years or so, and very familiar with how they're structured. So when the new law came out in 2022, I saw an opportunity because I realized that the law really offered a couple of really great benefits to investors. One being priority processing if you invest in a rural area, and another one being that now you only need to keep your money invested in a project for 2 years, at least 2 years. And then there were other great benefits like the integrity measures, where the regional centers are required to provide better oversight over these projects. So I think the new law has been really pretty great for new investors that are investing in after 2022. I wanted to structure an offering to deliver these benefits, the new benefits that investors could take advantage of. So I started looking at different industries, and what would be an industry in a rural area that could potentially, generate cash flow quickly enough from the money that they're investing that they could start repaying investors faster than what a typical construction project may be able to do, which will take typically 5-7 years. So what I realized was that oil and gas sector is really uniquely suited for this, to deliver both priority processing because of rural locations of these oil and gas wells, as well as the way oil and gas generates revenue and the development timeline of each well. So that's kind of a high-level overview of why I structured this offering. And before I start getting to the project presentation, I want to introduce you to our guest today, Mitch Wexler. Mitch is a partner at Fragomen. Fragomen is a leading firm dedicated to immigration services worldwide. The firm has 6,000 immigration professionals and support staff in more than 60 offices. Mitch is the managing partner of the firm's Southern California offices, including Irvine, Los Angeles, and San Diego. Mitch works with individuals, startups, mid-size, and large multinational companies for their work visa immigration matters. Mitch has a significant private client practice, which includes E2, L1s, EB5, extraordinary ability, and national interest waiver cases. He's a California State Bar certified specialist in immigration and nationality law. Mitch also teaches business and investment immigration law at the University of California, Irvine Law School. Thanks for joining us so early today, Mitch. I know it's 6 a.m. for you, so I owe you a big thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for that introduction as well. And just specifically on EB5, I've been doing it since the beginning of the program, which came out in 1990. It had a bunch of stops and starts, as you well know. But I agree with you that since the passage of RIA in 2022, it's a whole new, favorable, stable world for EB5. So it's a good time for new investors to consider getting into EB5.
Great. Mitch, I think at this point we'll get more into, give us an overview of the EB5 program, the regulations, if you can start us with that.
Yeah, I think we can illustrate most of what I'm trying to relay. So let's see what comes up here. This kind of goes through the timeline and a typical life cycle of an EB5 case. Okay, so the first piece of the puzzle is the EB5 application itself is done on a form I-526. So that's the EB5. It's called a petition, but most commonly understood as an application. And the real, even before it can be filed, the real heavy lift is documenting not only the lawful source, but the path of the funds to be used for this investment. So it's a job of me and my team to really help the client identify the easiest 800K of their net worth to quarantine and document. So it really is a heavy lift. The way I like to describe it to clients is we need literally, well, just about literally a piece of paper for every leg of every journey of every dollar. And there's 800,000 of them. So these applications aren't e-filed. It's very old school. We file them in big banker boxes, you know, a meter thick. A truck comes and takes it away. So I think that the biggest challenge that clients have is they assume just because, you know, it's white money and it's all taxed and it's clean money, that it's going to be easy to document. So source of fund scenarios vary wildly. It could be very simple. If the applicant is actually in the United States already, maybe with an H-1B, working for a public company and they have stock in it, they just peel off a few shares of stock and that's it. So the funds can be from the US, earned in the US. That's often a surprise to my clients when I explain that to them. But if the client is in India, we have to really see where and how the funds were first earned. You know, was it inherited by a great grandparent in rural India where there's very little documentation? Those are going to be tougher cases and it'll take a longer period of time. So usually for purposes of this presentation, I like to set clients' expectations at about an average of a couple of months to put the application, the 526E application package together, because it is a package. So it's not only documenting the source, so where the money came from, but the path where the money's been. So it's very unusual for an EB5 applicant, let's say in Mumbai, to earn money and just pile it up in a savings account. They're probably deploying it to different asset classes. They're buying stocks, mutual funds, bonds, real estate, what have you. So those are the legs of the journey that I was referring to. So then those assets are going to be liquidated. Maybe they're going to take out a loan against the equity of those assets. So we need a piece of paper for all of that. So it's the 526E, and then we get documentation from the project itself. So the PPM that Rupy referred to, the private placement, the memorandum, the offering documents. And so we get a whole package from the project. And then the applicant actually makes the investment. They wire it into the escrow account of the project. So first question I get is, you know, how long is the agency, USCIS, going to take to adjudicate the 526E? It can vary wildly. As Rupy mentioned, rural projects get what they call priority processing. We didn't really know what that meant until about a month ago when we started seeing rural approvals. I personally received one in 85 days. There have been reports of 26E rural approvals even faster than that. But still, even for rural project, set expectations at maybe 6 months or so, 4 to 6 months. And if it's not a rural project, which many are that are on the market right now, they're in high unemployment areas. I'm telling clients it'll take between 12 and 18 months for that to be adjudicated. Sometimes time is critical to a client, sometimes it's not. There are safe and unsafe rural projects, there are safe and unsafe high unemployment projects. So working with somebody like Rupy is really going to be invaluable. So now the 526E is approved. Let's go to the next step. So if the applicant is in India, they're going to process for their immigrant visa as opposed to a non-immigrant visa, which is denoted by letters. Many of you may have heard of a B visa, F1, H1, L1. Those are all non-immigrant visas. So when the applicant is applying from India, once the 526E is approved, it then goes to another federal agency called the National Visa Center, or the NVC. And it's their job to get each qualifying family member what they call documentarily qualified, or DQ'd. And that's going to take 6 to 8 months or so. Sometimes USCIS, the immigration agency adjudicating the 526, doesn't promptly forward the file to the NVC, so that could take a couple of months. Once it's at NVC, they'll probably take 4 to 6 months to do their job. So here's where they're going to ask for what we call civil documents for each applicant: birth certificates, marriage certificates, police certificates, medical exams. So once they have everything for each family member, and assuming there's no quota backlog, and I'll talk about that in a moment, the NVC notifies the relevant US consulate. If it's in India, it's all going to be in Mumbai. And then you get into their immigrant visa scheduling queue. Right now, that's taking a few months. So once the visas are issued to the family, everybody goes there and they get issued their EB5 immigrant visas. Those visas are good for 6 months. So each family member has 6 months within which to use that visa to enter the US to activate their EB5 green card. So once they step foot on US soil, they're a green card holder. They're a conditional 2-year green card holder. Let me quickly switch gears now and address the scenario where the applicant is in the United States. Step 1 is the same. The 526E is the same. But if they're maintaining valid non-immigrant status, in most cases, they can concurrently file what we call step 2, which is not consular processing, because they're not processing at a consulate. They're going to adjust their status from non-immigrant to immigrant. We call adjustment of status AOS, and that's another separate package. So that gets filed with the 526E. It has 3 components. One is a work permit, it's called an EAD, an employment authorization document, and another is advanced parole, called that AP. So once we file that combined application package, we call it concurrent filing, we're seeing work permits come out in about 3 to 4 months or so. Sometimes the advanced parole comes out in the same document, which is on the other side of the work permit. Sometimes they bifurcate it and they'll issue the advanced parole a few months later. So once the adjustment of status is approved, that's their first day of being a 2-year conditional green card holder, just like the applicant who just arrived from India. So let's fast forward. Let's keep going down my timeline. We'll fast forward to the end of that 2-year period of time. So now they have a conditional green card during the last 90 days of that 2 years. So during months 21 to 24, we get to file the third and final leg of this journey. It's done on a form I-829, the purpose of which is to remove the conditions to make the green card unconditional. So we have to prove a couple of things. Number one is that the investment has been sustained for the requisite period of time. And as Rupy alluded to, the definition of the sustainment period changed as a result of the new law that came out in March of 2022, down to 2 years. The way it used to be defined as sustained is that the applicant could not have exited the investment all the way through the end of that 2-year conditional green card period. And for some applicants who might get stuck in what we call retrogression or a backlog, that's artificially extending, that would have artificially extended the sustainment period. And they couldn't exit for sometimes 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, depending on the country of birth. It doesn't go by country of citizenship, by the way, it goes by country of birth. So that's one of the things the 829, and now it's defined as simply 2 years, which Rupy's going to talk about because her project actually favorably addresses that. One of the very few on the market that does. The other item of eligibility that the 829 looks to adjudicate is job creation. So EB5 is really a job creation program. So each investor has to be responsible or allocated the creation of 10 full-time jobs. So most projects, due to some economic algorithms and methodology, job creation is just a formula. And most projects that are on the market now have already either mostly or completely created the requisite number of jobs for all the investors that they're seeking. So that's usually not a problem at the 829 stage. So I collect all these documentations, we file the 829, and currently they're taking a bloody long period of time as well, probably at least, 1 to 2 to 3 years or so. In about 3 weeks, we get a receipt back on the 829. And that receipt clearly across the top of it says, this is a 4-year extension of your conditional green card. So everyone can still go in and out of the US, work anywhere, go to school anywhere. The agency just doesn't want us to bother them for a long period of time until they get their act together. But expectations should be set at probably a couple of years or so. Once the 829 is approved, you're an unconditional green card holder. And if 5 years have lapsed from either entering the U.S. as a conditional green card holder or from when your AOS, adjustment of status, was approved, at that point you could apply for U.S. citizenship. You never have to, and you could do so anytime thereafter. But that's the earliest point in time where you're eligible to apply for U.S. citizenship. Now, there's some physical presence requirements, and we have many clients that travel and remain out of the United States for extensive periods of time. We can get into that on an individual basis. But if U.S. citizenship is the ultimate objective, just to know the earliest point in time you can do that is when the 829 is approved and the conditional green card status was at least 5 years prior. So that's a typical life cycle of one of these cases. Each case varies depending on the facts and circumstances, but I think that's a pretty good, thorough, general life cycle recitation. Back to you, Rupy.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mitch. So everyone, you can if you have any questions, we will have 15 minutes in the end. We will attempt to answer questions that you post. So now I'm actually going to play about a 4-minute video on our project. It's mostly just describing the process, so you understand, at a high level what we're doing.
The United States government is going to purchase oil to refill the Strategic Petroleum Reserve when prices fall to $70 a barrel. That means oil companies can invest to ramp up production now with confidence they'll be able to sell their oil to us at that price in the future. $70 is a good price for companies, and it's a good price for the taxpayers, and it's critical to our national security. We'll keep doing everything we can to keep it going, to ensure that our energy independence and security is available, and to lower gas prices here at home. We're producing 12 million barrels of oil per day. In fact, we're on track for record oil production in 2023. Invest in America.
In the Anadarko Basin, there are literally tens of thousands of wells that have been drilled, and that creates an enormous database of information. We've used that information to high-grade the areas that we believe have the best chance of success for our program. In the last 15 years, the industry has developed horizontal drilling technology, which has really been the key technology and economic driver for what we do.
What I like about the oil and gas investing is the development timeline. It's a very short development timeline. Most of the revenue is produced in the first 18 months. With this deal, we're projecting that we will have enough revenue accumulated to repay the investors after 24 months. So the way we've structured this offering is that we are earmarking all of the oil revenue into an account for EB5 investors. No one else can participate in the profits of this program until the EB5 investment is repaid.
I was hired by Rupy Cheema as a third party to look at this to see if it was a decent deal. And so they hired me because I got a lot of experience. I look at a lot of deals. This is one of the better deals that I've seen in quite a while.
There's oil and gas everywhere we will operate. The question really is, how much can we produce at what rate and at what economics?
Great. Okay, I'm going to do a little slide presentation for a couple of minutes now. Just wanted to just give you some high-level points about the project. We are drilling in the state of Oklahoma, so you can just see where that is on the map. And these are the states that have at least 1 billion barrels of proved oil reserves. This is based on coming from the Department of Energy. And just wanted to give you that, a little background, geography, where we are. And as far as our project is concerned, if we compare it to other projects, some high-level benefits, it is a rural project, so the processing times are quicker than high unemployment area projects. And as Mitch mentioned, there is immediate visa availability after you get the I-526E approved. And because of the nature of this business, we are aiming to pay people starting in 2.5 years after your investment. And you also participate in profits on an ongoing basis. So an oil well will typically produce for 20 to 25 years, We expect to sell all of our assets at about the year 6 mark. And that's when we're projecting about a $400,000 return per investor based on an average price of 70. So it's an $800,000 investment. So it qualifies for the lower investment amount. We've talked about priority processing and visa availability. We are looking for 150 investors, which means we have to create 1,500 jobs. The project is expected to create about 2,200 jobs. So we have a good job cushion of about 49%. I'll get more into, I have a little video to play from our CEO. He'll talk a little bit more about what are proven reserves. And so just to give you a little timeline of an oil well's life, will produce for about 20 years, but as you can see from this chart, most of the production is going to happen in the first 3 years. And that's what allows us to earmark those revenues and start paying investors in the first couple of years. And so, as we said earlier, we are targeting for a repayment starting in 2.5 years. And we have a stellar management team. Our team has over 140 years of experience collectively. They've drilled thousands of wells. So they're very familiar with the Anadarko Basin and where we're going to be drilling. And I'm just going to play another little video. Our CEO couldn't be with us today, so he did a presentation the other day, and I thought that he explained some things really well. So I'd like to play that for a couple of minutes.
I began my career 43 years ago drilling oil and gas wells after I received my petroleum engineering degree. I started here and remain here in Denver, Colorado, but I've worked all over the United States and in many countries internationally. I spent quite a bit of time in Indonesia, South America, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. During that time, I've designed, drilled, and completed many thousands of wells, vertical and horizontal style wells, and pleased to work with a large number of very talented professionals, some of them who have been working with me for years, and most recently in Oklahoma, are joining the EB5 team along with myself. Recently, we began to explore for opportunities in Oklahoma. What we realized was that there were many thousands of wellbores in Oklahoma that had been drilled 20 or 30 years ago using old technology. And we have witnessed over the last 10 years, large companies come in and drill brand new wellbores and have great success in some of the target in the target zones of interest for us, but also specifically in some of the reservoirs that are of interest to us. It piqued our interest in replicating that, so we began to study the geology and the performance of these wells and realized that the existing wellbores had the same opportunity. The difference is that we can save a significant amount of money by entering and drilling out of existing wellbores rather than drilling brand new wells. The wells we'll be drilling are wellbores that are in known producing areas. I'd like to emphasize that. That's very important. We're not exploring for oil and gas. We're doing infill drilling and we're doing redevelopment. When these wells were originally drilled, they only produced between 10 and 20% of the original oil and gas that was in place. That leaves between 80 and 90% of the oil that was originally in the reservoir left to be produced. Horizontal drilling and the technology that we have now for completing those wells will extract another 20 to 50% of the oil that's in place. And the oil that's in place is millions of barrels. And we will be selecting locations and wellbores that are in this entire area where there's known production. So I want to emphasize that. That's important. We are not exploring. This is a redevelopment and application of new technology to extract additional oil from known reservoirs. One of the things that I think is important to know too about Oklahoma is that it is the 6th largest, in terms of reserves, the 6th largest oil state in the United States. It has almost 2 billion barrels of reserves in the ground, estimated by the United States government, the Energy Department of the United States. So the potential is large. The oil and gas is there. We know it's there. And we'll be working around other companies that are producing from the same reservoir.
So it doesn't look like we have any questions at the moment. Mitch?
What I didn't spend any time on, Rupy, that I probably should have, we mentioned visa availability a few times, and I kind of glossed over that, and I really shouldn't. So just very briefly, there's not an unlimited supply of EB5 green cards. There's 10,000 per fiscal year for the whole world. No single country can get more than 7%. And a few countries historically have demand has exceeded supply, and India is one of those countries. So in the past, there was a backlog for EB5 India. There will be another one at some point in the future, but right now there's not, because the new EB5 rules that came out in 2022 came up with brand new investment categories that just didn't have an opportunity to sell out yet, to fill up yet. So right now there's no backlog at all for EB5 India. So it's a good opportunity to get in, but there has to be continued visa availability up to the point when either the immigrant visa is applied for in Mumbai or the adjustment of status is adjudicated in the US. So we're not sure exactly when India EB5 is going to backlog. When it does, due to some complex calculations, a backlog will be created, but it's not anticipated to be nearly as long as previous backlogs going many, many years. So it is possible that someone in the United States, for example, in H-1B status, files EB5 concurrently with the adjustment of status application package that I referenced. As long as they can file the application, they'll get an extendable work permit, extendable advance parole, so they can continue to live and work forever in the United States. And if India EB5 backlogs while they're on that journey, that's okay. They still have this extendable work permit and travel pass. The application package will go back on the shelf and be taken off the shelf once their turn is reached on this future waiting list. So either they'll make it to the finish line before India EB5 backlogs, or if not, it's not terrible, because the combination of an extendable work permit and travel pass for someone who's in the United States combined is really 95% of the value of a green card. If the applicant's applying in India or somewhere else in the world, they'll just have to wait there if they're adversely impacted by a future waiting list. So I kind of glossed over that earlier. I wanted to make that point. So this is my contact information. All I do is immigration law, not only EB5, but only immigration. I'm an independent attorney, happy to collaborate with Rupy, of course. But yeah, well, all of my EB5 practice is representing investors. We don't represent projects and regional centers, so we're exclusively on the investor side. So that's me, Rupy.
Thank you. Mitch, I'm going to ask you a question. Can you talk a little bit about how people are allowed to, borrow money to invest in EB5? And
yeah, so the requisite capital, in this case, $800K, can be in the form of a loan, or a portion of it can be in the form of a loan. Historically, we had to document any security or collateral used. They actually changed that as a result of a court case. So yeah, an applicant can take out a loan against the equity in their home or any other asset, and once they have that cash, they make the investment into the EB5 project. So it could be savings, it could be loans, very, very common source of funds scenario, as we call it.
Right. And Mitch, I often get asked a question. Sometimes people need time to liquidate their assets, so they may have half the money available. They say, well, can I get a certain amount of time to make the rest of the investment? Do you see, if people take too long to make the investment, are there any issues simply especially with the priority processing? If the I-526 adjudication happens quickly, is there an issue with not being fully invested?
Yeah, so you're talking about what we call partials, partially funded.
Yeah.
So there's no law that requires the full funding upon filing. That the vast majority of cases are just that, but the law actually reads actively in the process of investing the requisite amount of capital. So from time to time, we're pretty conservative on this, but from time to time, if there's a compelling reason, we'll put together and file an EB5 package when the applicant or client is not fully liquid yet. So maybe they have 500K in cash now, and they have an asset in escrow that's being sold. And escrow is going to close in 90 days, and we want to get the application in. We want to get an early filing date, which is called a priority date, because that would be that applicant's turn in the queue if later on they find themselves impacted by a quota issue. But we like to keep a very short time frame on topping it off. I like 90 days, maybe 120 days, definitely no longer than 6 months, because we don't want the application to be adjudicated when it's not fully funded, because they're not likely to approve it. They won't deny it. They'll issue something called an RFE, a request for evidence, a request for additional evidence. And we have 84 days to respond to an RFE. And if they're still not liquid within that 84 days, it's going to be a problem. So we always try to avoid problems. So either fully funded is going to be our mantra, or a partially funded case to be topped off within 3 or 4 or 5 months or so.
Great. That's what we tell investors as well, that we really don't want to go beyond 90 days to be fully funded.
Yeah, there are some projects and regional centers out there that'll take 100K down and just get it to us in a year or two, and that's dangerous in my opinion.
I have another question as well for you, Mitch. I'm finding that some of the regional centers out there are also providing some lending, and it always makes me a little nervous when the lending is coming from affiliated entities that are also promoting the project. Do you see any concerns with that?
It's a popular concept, and you're right, there's a few that are doing that. Since I don't represent regional centers and projects, I personally haven't delved too deep into it, but it's never with the regional center itself. But you're right, it's with some kind of affiliated entity. I haven't had any clients take advantage of that yet. If and when I do, I'll look into it a little deeper, but certainly additional due diligence needs to occur.
Right. Yeah, I asked that question because I've heard some different opinions from different immigration attorneys. That there may be a risk if it is an affiliated entity, that it is probably safer to go to a third party and borrow the money instead of the project itself. But you're right, I don't know about the mechanics either, how these are structured.
Right, and it hasn't been tested yet. It very well may be fine. It just hasn't been tested yet.
Right. I have a question here. It says, will the company provide us with any sort of bank guarantee for the invested amount? Just to clarify, as far as guarantees, Mitch can talk about that, how the program does not allow for guarantee of repayment. Can you give us a little insight on that, Mitch?
Yeah, well, the investment has to be at risk, so it can't be guaranteed. But the way a lot of these deals are structured, the deals on the market, they set up an LLC because it has to be an equity investment. So a lot of these regional centers, I'm not speaking for Rupy's, but a lot of these regional centers set up entities, LLCs, and they pool 800K from multiple investors from around the world. And they all have an equity stake in that entity. So it qualifies as an equity investment. And the business of that entity is to loan money to projects. I don't believe that's Rupy's model, but that's a common model that's out there. So what can be guaranteed is the repayment of the loan to the entity. What can't be guaranteed is the money coming back to the investor. It's kind of very nuanced there. We can talk offline if anybody has deeper questions on that. But generally, the return of capital cannot be guaranteed. By law, it has to be at risk.
Right. So, and also, I think your question may also have been related to the project, if we have any kind of a collateral or guarantee on this project. So I do get often asked that question because of pretty much all the projects, other projects that investors are looking at, because they tend to be pretty much real estate projects where the money is being lent to a developer. And sometimes they may have some sort of security or collateral. Even though I've looked deeply at these mezzanine loans and I know what the structural risks are. So I will tell you that this project is structured very differently. We are not making a loan to anyone, to another developer at a cheap rate. I've structured this and more like I guess the best comparison is more like a private equity fund, because you're investing into the entity, let's call that EB5 fund. All 150 investors will invest into the EB5 fund. And that EB5 fund is going to own and control the job creating entity. So all of the assets ultimately belong to the EB5 fund, all the oil and gas assets. And there's nobody else that owns the project. We as management and our operators as management will participate in profits, but we cannot participate in profits unless all of the investors' $800,000 is returned first. So, so when you ask for guarantee, the EB5 investors are first in line. So they have the first claim to assets, as opposed to you may be comparing it to a real estate project where typically a bank will have the first claim to assets because they've lent in the first position to a project. And also, you're looking at a loan where the developer actually has to pay you back if they have the money, and they control all the equity and they control all of the profits. It's really up to them to decide how they pay themselves. So that's the difference here, is that we have an obligation. The way this has been structured is that the EB5 investors have claim to the assets first to get their $800,000. So should something go wrong, if we were to liquidate all of our oil and gas wells, we have to make sure the $800,000 comes back. Only if there's anything left over after that, we participate along with the investors. It doesn't look like I have any more questions here. So Mitch, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all your insight. So yeah, and you can see Mitch's contact information. If you have any further questions for both of us, we're here to answer them.
Thanks for the opportunity, Rupy. Always a pleasure collaborating with you.
Thank you.